All right, let's take a look at a free response question from the AP Computer Science A exam released for 2018. And this question is going to, in particular, cover class design. And I think that this is a question that can really be a slam dunk if you break down the different components of a class. You know that when you're writing a class design free response question, you're going to need to include a class header, instance variables, constructors, and methods. And it's going to be your job to take a look at what's given to you and determine what is the class header name going to be, what instance variables do I need to declare, how many constructors do I need, and what are their parameters, and then lastly, what are the methods, if any, that I need to write, and what are their return values. All right, let's take a look at question number 3 from the 2018 released free response questions for AP Computer Science A. Here it says the string checker interface describes classes that check if strings are valid according to some criterion. It's going to return true if the string is valid, false otherwise. And so one of the first things you want to do when tackling a question like this is really understand everything that's being asked and thoroughly read the question before you start diving in and designing code. So it says a code word checker is a string checker. A code word checker object can be constructed with 3 parameters, 2 integers and a string. The first 2 parameters specify the minimum and maximum code word lengths respectively, and the third parameter specifies a string that must not occur in the word. And then they give us some examples here. So they create a string checker object and they run code word checker on it with 3 parameters, 5, 8, and a $sign. And if we go up, it tells us that the minimum and maximum code word lengths are those first 2 parameters. So we know that it needs to be between 5 and 8 words and that it cannot contain a $sign. And so we have a couple sample runs here where it runs it with the word happy, and that passes. They run it with happy $sign, that does not pass because it contains a $sign. The word code is too short and happy code is too long. Now they have a second run here where it runs string checker, it runs code word checker on a string checker object with the word pass. Now they only gave it 1 parameter here and not 3. And that's important because that tells us then that when we go to design this class, we are going to need a second constructor. The first constructor, they tell us, will take 3 parameters, but the second will only obviously take 1. And they sneak in here, it says, because the bounds are not specified, the length bounds are 6 and 12 inclusive. And then we see a couple example runs of this. And we see that it is case sensitive because it does contain the word pass here, but it's with a capital P instead of a lowercase p. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into it. It says to write the code checker class, and it needs to meet all specifications. So if I'm talking about designing this, I know that I need to have my class header. And then I know that we are going to need to have 2 constructors. And we know that the first constructor is going to take 3 parameters. And we know that the second constructor is only going to take 1. And then in looking at this, we know that we need to check to see if a certain code word is that in the word that's being checked. So let's go ahead and begin here. We know that for the class header, we need to declare it public class code word checker. And we're going to say implements string checker, and that's going to be the extent of the interface here. And we are going to declare 3 private instance variables. Declaring private instance variables are going to be an essential part of any class design question. So we have private int for the minimum length of the word. We are going to have another one for the maximum length of the word. And then we know that we need to pass in a string, we're going to call it the bad word, that we are looking for. And now let's go ahead and create these 2 constructors like we said earlier, the first is going to have 3 parameters. So we're going to say public code word checker. I'm going to say int min, int max, string word. And it's really important to make sure that you have the private instance variable on the left side of the equal sign set equal to the formal parameters on the right side of the equal sign. And so let's go ahead and fill those in. And then this second constructor, it only took in one formal parameter, and that was a string. So we know that the private instance variable bad word could be set equal to that formal parameter, but then we also have to account for what happened with the minimum and the maximum. They defaulted, it said in the code, to 6 and 20 inclusive. So we'll go ahead and put those down there. And now we've completed our 2 constructors. We've declared our private instance variables, and we have our class header. Now let's get into the method that we need to write. And we know that we need to create a method called isValid, and it needs to take in a string, as we see here, like my pass or my passport, happy code, and we know that it needs to return a value. So when I go to declare that, we're going to say public. We know that it has a return type of Boolean. We know that the name of the function is isValid. Passes in a string. And then what do we want to see happen here? We know that we want it to return true in the event that all 3 conditions are met. That the word being passed in is within the range of numbers given in the first 2 parameters, or in the default in between 6 and 20 inclusive, and we need to make sure that it does not contain that that bad word. And so let's go ahead and think about how we can write that. We know that it's going to be a conditional statement. So if the length of that string is greater than or equal to the minimum length, and keep in mind here that we are calling the private instance variable. I have seen students make the mistake of putting the parameters, the formal parameters there. It's the private instance variable. So if the length of the string is greater than or equal to the minimum length, and the length of the string is less than or equal to the max length, and we have a third condition here. We know that we need to check this string specifically to see if it contains this bad word. And the easiest way to do that, I think, is going to be to call index of that bad word. And we need that to be equal to -1. Remember, index of returns -1 in the event that it is not contained in the string upon which it's being called. So if all of those conditions are met, return true, and we're going to say else, return false, and that'll do it. Now there is a slightly faster way to clean this up or to write this, and that is, we know that if we call a single return statement, if we have a single return statement followed by a what we have here, this whole expression is going to return a Boolean, or it's going to evaluate to a Boolean. It will just return the Boolean statement there, either true or false. So if you wanted to get by without having to write everything that we just previously had, you could do that there. And we have wrapped up this class, code word checker.